Hello and welcome to All Rock Digital's talk at EGX 2020. We're going to look at how playing games can get you into space. So who are we? Well, I'm Mike Dorr. I'm the Senior Producer and QA Manager over at All Rock Digital, and over here is Jemima.
Hi, I'm Jem. I'm the Marketing and Community Manager at Oric Digital.
And why are we wearing these costumes, and why are we talking about how playing games can get you into space? Well, we are making a video game about getting into space called Mars Horizon. It's a space agency management game where you ultimately try and get the first boots on Mars. But it really encompasses all parts of the entire space race and every part of running a space agency yourself. So we've learned a lot in making that, and it makes us, would you say, slightly qualified to discuss this, Jem? Maybe a little bit?
I like to think so. We've worked very closely with the European Space Agency and the UK Space Agency on this, and we've done a lot of live streams with them recently with different people from all over the industry, and they've talked about how they got into the industry and how our game represents that in real life. So yeah, we've had a lot of experience recently working with them.
And we've learned a lot. And we also have joining us Dr. Tomas Rawlings. Say hello, Tom.
Hello. So I am the CEO here at Auroch Digital, but also, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, I've actually done quite a lot of research and consulting around how education, games, and learning, the mind, all those kind of things play, all those sort of things come together. So it's actually a subject, both space and is something that fascinates me, but also how we learn and why games are generally a good thing for us to be doing is also a subject that's really interesting. And so, yeah, this is great to talk about.
So we're going to be talking about how games can help you get into space, but it's also good to look at, we obviously all work in games, so looking at how our passions and our experiences have helped us to get into our roles today. So for me, obviously, a passion for video games really helped in that. But I've also run several guilds in World of Warcraft. I've been playing it a long time. I love it. And that taught me a lot of skills about people management, community management, communications, organization massively, because trying to schedule up 22 people on a weekday in one go, that was a big learning curve. So that's been really useful. And working in video games meant it was something my employers actually understood. So I could say in the interviews, oh, I ran a successful Mythic Raiding Guild, and they'll be like, oh, that's really impressive. Whereas other industries may have been like, oh, okay.
A geeky thing that I really like, that I reckon has helped me get where I am today, is I don't think I'd be where I am today without my training in Bomberman. I don't know if you've ever played Bomberman, but it's kind of like a mix of strategy, planning ahead, thinking on your feet and adapting to change, seeing an explosion long before it goes off and avoiding it. I probably played tens of thousands of hours of Bomberman, and I've always thought now this has got to be sharpening something. And now I'm a video game producer, and at pretty much every minute of the day I'm planning ahead or reacting to change, or indeed from time to time having to drop bombs.
Well, I suppose for me, the anecdote of how did my geekiness sort of prepare me for the world of work is kind of more direct one, in that when I was younger, I was really into games, both video games, role-playing games, tabletop games, and I spent so much of my time playing them and making them as well. And my dad, love my dad, but he was thinking of the world he was brought up in. He's like, it's all very well good you playing these games, and you'd say, what do you want to be? And I'd say, well, I want to design games. And he'd go, yeah, but kind of need skills that's actually employable in the real world. So he sort of talked to me about becoming a draftsman, which is the people who hand draw engineering diagrams for, new components or bits of cars or planes or whatever. And so, I started learning that. And of course, the irony is that the physical drawing of engineering parts is a completely redundant skill that no one uses these days. And actually, the game design stuff that I did learn through playing and making games is what has helped me get the job I'm in now. So, yeah, go geekiness.
So also, we've done quite a few streams recently. Check them out on our YouTube channel with real scientists and space agency staff. So we were talking to them about how we created Mars Horizon with these real references. They included a robotic exploration program manager. We had the head of international spaceflight policy. We had the human exploration program manager and head of branding and partnerships with ESA. They have really interesting insights, and they all had quite different ways into their industry. So we'll be putting clips of that, those guys in throughout the stream for you to check out as well. So we've got a really good clip here of Paul Smith. He's the robotic exploration program manager at the UK Space Agency. So this is talking about how he got working in the space agency and how he gave himself the opportunity.
Paul, how did you get into this whole space game?
Well, it certainly wasn't through exploding satellite around Mercury. I don't think they'd let me in if I did that. But I came in through a sort of roundabout kind of way. I've been interested in space as a kid. Of course, I mean, who doesn't want to be an astronaut? But I ended up doing psychology and neuroscience at university. And I sort of left academia from there after getting a master's and ended up working for the research councils. So they're the sort of body that funds the majority of science in the UK. And I found out that the space agency was based in the same building. So I ended up basically banging the door down to get in.
So even if you don't actually want to go into space yourself, there's still a lot of ways that you can be involved in the space industry, wherever your passion is, wherever your skills are. So we've got a really good clip here from Libby Jackson, the Human Exploration Program Manager from the UK Space Agency, and she's talking about just that.
Space is a wonderful context for learning. You can look at space and go, oh, I want to understand the maths of it, or I want to draw a picture of it, or I'm going to write a poem about it. It really is just a subject and a context that takes you in so many different ways. In the same way that the space sector has people in it doing all kinds of different things. So, you know, as well as the engineers and the scientists, there are people at the UK Space Agency who are our finance team, and there are lawyers who work with us. There are comms people who are, you know, writing the stories. There's so many different ways to get into the space sector. But no, so we had so much fun really trying to make sure that as many people as possible found out about Tim's flight, that young people got involved. And it was crazy. We reached 1 in 3 schools, and 2-3 million young people actively took part in education activities around Tim's flight. It was really phenomenal.
So Tom, before we get into this, you're a doctor, not the medical kind, the other kind. But this means you're in a good position to talk about this topic. So how did your doctorate set you up for that?
Well, it sort of does and it doesn't. I guess it does in the sense that it obviously a doctorate is a higher level of education, and it does in that. But my doctorate is in an area called software studies. So I studied how software development can be looked through using an evolutionary model. So there I'm using my understanding of evolution, a much more scientific based understanding of that. And I'm also using the understanding of software development, part of which comes from me being a software developer, a games developer. So it shows how you can have these really disparate interests and they can come together to make something really important. In addition to that, I've done a lot of consultancy about how games can help organizations or companies with things that might seem a bit not central to gaming, but that's been organizations such as the Wellcome Trust. I've done talks to the BBC about this. I've run events with the Royal Society, who are the oldest scientific organization in the world, using games to help talk about science and research. So yeah, it's something I'm both really interested in and have happened to have done quite a lot of work in. So yeah, it's really good to talk about this subject and really how games can help you, and you may end up in space as a result of them.
Cool, and we'll be referencing some organizations and research throughout the talk. So we'll put a Twitter thread of all those links together and make them available for you guys to check out the research behind it.
Well, I'll jump in then at the start bit really with the power of play. And I've done quite a few talks at organizations where I talk about this, because often you'll hear people talk about, oh, the power of love, it crosses cultures and languages, or the power of music. And they do, and it does, and that's all true. But games have a much more powerful thing than that, in that they can cross species. And an example I use is a video of a cat playing with a squirrel. Now, normally these two animals would probably be incredibly wary of each other, and yet under the right circumstances, they play together. But more importantly, they understand that what play is. So they're both mammals, but they're completely different species of mammals, and they're able to kind of play with each other.
Is that a pet squirrel then? Oh.
I'm assuming the cat's been well fed at this point. Right?
Yeah, he's going to have to be really well fed. Yeah, I don't know. I think, yeah, they are actually playing, aren't they?
Yeah.
That's really cute. I mean, I play a lot of games with my dogs, biting. Bring back my pants.
I love where dogs do, like, if you ever see a dog, they do this little crouch thing and they'll stand up. That's like dog body language to say, do you want to play? And if you see two dogs doing it, it means that even if one dog is massive and one dog is tiny, they know it's both play and they know they can both do it and no one's going to get hurt. But they will do that with other animals as well. They do it to humans.
Does it to
and they do it to like cats, yeah. So that's another example of like cross-species play, that they're sort of signaling, I want to have fun, and it's, you know, it's not serious.
I'm not going to
really
eat you at the moment.
Yeah, and for me, I think that's there's an intrinsic thing. There's a kind of study of science where they look at how to understand human beings, and one of them is this idea of human beings as like play centric. Like we think of play as this thing that you just do as kids or whatever, but of course it isn't. It's a thing that's with you all your life, and whether it's you're watching a football match in later life, or whether you're playing with kids, or whether you're just playing a game, or whatever age you are, you realize that play is so intrinsic to being human, and in fact being a mammal, that I think it's just below the surface of our behavior all the time, which is great, and therefore it's going to have a really powerful impact on how our brains work, which you'll see as we talk through this. So I'll jump in a bit and then say, like, one of the key things is on motivation and learning, and I'll quote what the science says. So there's a bit of research done where they talk about that reward outcomes appear to play a major role in modulating episodic memory. Basically, there's a whole bunch of types of memory, but what they're really saying, this, if you read the research, is that the positive rewards, when you get positive rewards, it helps you remember, which sounds really obvious. Like if every time you got a sum right in maths, somebody gave you a sweet, you were more likely to get those sums right. You want to remember the right answers because you want the sweets. But obviously games by their nature are reward based. When you succeed in a game, you get a reward. So it stands to reason, if you start saying, well, let's use games in helping people to remember stuff, to learn stuff, that actually it becomes a positive thing. And if it's positive and you enjoy it, you're motivated to do it. So there's actually been research done on specific where they've used games. For example, there was a piece of research. Researchers had two groups of students, one of whom used a kind of game that ran through all of their learning, and the other group just did the normal learning. And they kind of came to the conclusion that the evaluation results of the learning outcomes and learning motivation demonstrated that incorporating ubiquitous games into the English learning process could achieve better learning outcomes and motivation than using non-gaming methods. And what that says is that there's this really positive relationship between gaming and play and learning. And I think that's really interesting. There's still more research to be done, and I'm simplifying a more complex field, but it's apparent that there's something interesting going on there.
So does a game have to be made especially for learning to help you learn?
Well, again, so yeah, no. And I think this is really crucial. Like, just because a game, like, I think people think, oh, well, it's educational games, that's the learning bit, and normal games are not. And that is not the case. Anything that you enjoy, you can end up learning from. And games of all types ultimately tick those boxes of motivation and therefore you remembering it. So there's been countless times where, I found myself having learned interesting facts and stuff like that from playing, say, a game like Civilization. And you think, how do I remember, who that ruler was or what that dynasty was? And then you think, oh, yeah, it was playing Civ. Or So games themselves, like just being around that knowledge, you pick some of it up. And I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, Assassin's Creed's often people reference that for learning history, and in history class a lot of learners for Assassin's Creed. And it's really good that it can help you remember and understand these historical figures in a way that you can't get from just reading a book.
Right. I used to play this arcade game called The New Zealand Story, and it has this map screen, and like I must have been about 8 or 9, and I suddenly realised that I knew like where Auckland was, where Mount Cook, where Cook Strait was, because you just kind of learnt it off the map screen of a platform game without trying.
Yeah, Kerbal Space Program's a really good one to talk about here because of the physics involved. It's a complex game, but people love it so much that they will learn these complex things. If you just sit down and learn it, it's not that fun. But in order to play the game, to get better at it, and then they'll share tips with each other and teach each other, it's been a really nice way for people to learn that.
Yeah,
exactly.
And inspired a passion as well. Another one as well is like, would you ever play something that helps you increase the speed of your typing? Probably not for free, but if it was Typing of the Dead, I would pay. I would pay, yeah.
Classic.
Yeah, definitely. No, it's a great example.
Okay, so games can help learning in general, but how is that going to help someone get into space? Do they need to know like STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math subjects?
They do, and I think there's a few ways that games actually help with that. And there's one, it helps you become like sciencey minded. And there's a proper academic term for this, which is a scientific habit of mind. Which there's a kind of noted research paper in this area from back in 2008, and the researchers looked at a World of Warcraft forum. And what they were interested in is, what do people talk about on the forums? The assumption being, if World of Warcraft's just a waste of your time and all you're doing is like exchanging memes with each other, gaming is a waste of time. But they thought, is that the case? So they basically dug into all the forum posts and they categorized them. And what they found is that 86% of the forum discussions were what they called social knowledge construction rather than just banter, just chatting. And so half the posts, they evidence what they call systems-based reasoning, and 1 in 10 evidence model-based reasoning, and 65% displayed an evaluative epistemology in which knowledge is treated as an open-ended process of evaluation and argument. And that's a very clever way of saying that loads of the posts were about what is going on in this game and how can we understand it, and people exchanging knowledge and information about that. So in essence, what they're saying is, and if you think about this, the science is like this anyway. In a new gaming world you come into, you know there's a bunch of rules that govern that world. You just don't know what all those rules are. So how do you find out? Well, you try stuff, and if you die or succeed, you learn, well, this is the way that rule works. And so bit by bit, by trial and error, you figure out the rules of that world. And then crucially, once you get really good at a game, you figure out how to use those rules of that world in your favor. You figure out the kind of the good exploits, the good tips, the good tactics. And so in a way, playing games is like being part of a giant science experiment, and that gets you into this way of thinking whereby the idea of trial and error, of experimentation, of evaluating it based on knowledge and experience is fundamental to understanding that world. So that's a really valuable part of understanding all the STEM subjects is the value of evidence and the value of experiment. There's great games. There's a great writer, academic on this topic called James Paul Gee, and he wrote this brilliant book, which I read a few years ago, called "What Video Games Have to Teach Us About Learning and Literacy." And he didn't. There's an interview which I want to quote a bit from him, where people were saying, "Well, really, games?" And essentially he says, "So baby boomers like me inherited from the school system a view of intelligence that says, whoever's the quickest and most efficient to the goal is the smartest. If you can learn algebra in 6 weeks and I learn in 6 months, you're smarter than me." Gaming culture incorporate a different view of intelligence that says, try lots of risks, fail. If things don't work, rethink them. Let's think laterally, not just linearly. Don't try to rush your goals in the fastest, most efficient way, because you may miss a bunch of stuff. What's he saying? Side quests. What's he saying? It doesn't matter if you fail. Like trying and failing is intrinsic to games. And so it's that idea of getting away from rote learning where you just learn a bunch of like facts and into the idea of actually I'm learning stuff and I can put that stuff to use. So I would say, like, you know, you see this obviously in Kerbal Space Program is very, I mean, it's literally orbital mechanic experiments in the game as you put stuff together. But Mars Horizon, I mean, Mike, you know, we've got, you know, there's a trying and failing is a key loop in Mars Horizon, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, in every respect, whether it's, you know, like seeing if you can beat somebody by changing the rocket, so like it's not quite as good, but it'll be done quicker. There's, you know, the whole logic puzzles in the mission gameplay. Yeah, there's, as the game says, sometimes we learn more by failing when a rocket explodes. I think that's very relevant to this point here.
And I think interesting, when we went on a visit to the European Space Agency, we talked about that. That was also so much part of how the space race has advanced, is that understanding that when things go wrong, that's not the end of the story. That's not the end of the experiment. It's figuring out, well, why did that go wrong, and what can we learn from it, and what can we do different next time, which, you know, I feel we've got in Mars Horizon.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think, again, it puts you in that state of mind where failure is not the end point. Failure is part of the journey. And I think that's really critical to being, you know, to getting your head into that STEM mindset.
I think we've got a good quote from Libby Jackson on that, where she was talking about failure teaches you just as much as success sometimes. So it's not just the science, technology, and engineering, mathematics areas you can work in the space industry, though. And the skills that you pick up in games, such as, you know, organizing, budgeting, creative skills, organization, they're also useful as well. So we got a bit from Libby here talking about the different roles that you can do within the space industry. And I guess similarly, so obviously in Mars Horizon, you make all the decisions in mission control and you run it your own way. But in real life, how many people are involved in like one mission launching a rocket?
Oh yeah, hundreds, thousands in some cases. And I think looking at this and seeing what it is wonderful that it captures all these different decision points and different angles. But yes, in reality, it's lots and lots of people who are, one person's looking at the design of one tiny little bit of the spacecraft and somebody else is out negotiating the politics with, can you fly this thing and do you want to work in collaboration with this? And it's where there are just so many different roles and so many different ways in. And And there really and truly is something for everybody. And if space excites you, there's a job in the industry somewhere to use your skill set. You don't have to go and be a scientist. You don't have to be an engineer. That always the advice I give to people, and they say, how do I be an astronaut? How do I work in the space industry? Do the things you enjoy, because you'll do them well, and you'll find a path through life that excites you, and you'll do well at it. And if you know space is something you enjoy, go and look to see how you can apply your skills to it.
So teamwork is obviously something that you learn in a lot of games. It's crucial, it's a lot of fun, and it's a lot of for some people, it's a lot of reasons they play games, and that's also something that's super useful in getting into space or the space industry.
Yeah, and I think, from somebody who's worked in games for a long time, when you speak to people outside games, they assume that games, because it's often played on your own, so they think that it's a really solitary activity, and that's really not my experience of games. And actually, there's a lot of research out there showing that that's maybe not the case, that's a misunderstanding of how games work. So obviously in multiplayer games, especially a co-op game like Dota or something like that, then there's teamwork going on. But I think even in single player games, when you're chatting, say, on a forum about ways of doing stuff, if you're talking with a friend about how you did it and how they did it, it's that thing we referenced earlier, social knowledge construction. So there's a kind of teamwork going there. Even in a discussion outside the game, there's teamwork going on to understand the various aspects of that game and how it comes together. So to me, teamwork is implicit in games, and it's like I say, it's a common experience for me as a gamer. I've been all the way through. It's been quite a social activity. And yeah, again, when we've chatted with people from the European Space Agency and the UK Space Agency, it comes across that teamwork's so important within that. And so anything that's going to help you develop that skill of teamwork is really going to help you in getting a career in there. And so I want to quote from a source called EdSurge. It's a site of education-based articles. And they got this article that looked at this, and there's a great quote from it, which is, a highly competitive game, for example, can build persistence and even collaboration as anxious players work through solutions in order to win. Likewise, a multiplayer role-playing game poses challenges that require players to work together, setting the stage for collaborative problem solving. And that's what they're getting at. The very act of playing games where you're working as a team is getting your head into that space where working together to solve a problem is the normal thing you do. And that really is going to hold you well in a space-based career.
Yeah, so that's something, as I mentioned earlier, my World of Warcraft guild experience, when you've got like 22 people trying to take down one boss, but it's not just you're all working towards the same goal. It depends what your role is. If you're ranged DPS, if you're a healer, if you're a tank, you have very different roles, and those are split into mini teams that you each had a manager for each team, but all of those teams need to be in sync as well. So that was a very complicated thing to manage, and that is talking to Libby about mission control and in Mars Horizon, you get to do all the roles and you make all the decisions. But in real life, it's a lot of people all timing everything together, working all their skills together, all working on their own mini goals, but also all in sync together. So it's really good to be experienced in that kind of environment.
See, I like the fact in Mars Horizon we've got the diplomacy side of it, where you can work with other agencies or they offer to work with you. And to me, that shows that the real fundamental of teamwork, which is the balance that comes with it. So of course, you're sharing the glory with the rest of your team, but by working with them, you get access to stuff that you might not have on your own.
Yeah.
So a lot of the people that we talk to in our various live streams who work in the space industry, a lot of them have had that interest and passion in space from a very young age, and it can come from films, music, games especially. And you've seen nowadays with so many wonderful games about space, you're getting people who can share that passion and knowledge.
Andrew Koo was a big fan of Star Fox.
Oh yeah.
He was a huge fan of Star Fox. Yeah, that maybe one of the things combined with David Bowie, Star Wars, Star Trek around these that normalized the idea of space and made it seem accessible for him.
Yeah, and it doesn't always have to be super realistic or accurate. It can just be celebrating how exciting space is, or where we think the future of it could go, like things with Star Wars.
Right.
So having that inspiration, it really motivates people that they may love Star Wars, but they still want to work in space industry. It's not going to be exactly the same as Star Wars, but still awesome.
Absolutely, and from chatting to quite a few people at the UK Space Agency and ESA as we've been doing this work, it is surprising how often when you talk about, why did you get into this, that some kind of interest in science fiction, science early on in their lives has really given them that guiding star. See the pun there, of what they wanted to do, and it just kept coming up again and again. It's they came across something and they thought that looks so cool, I want to do that, and that's helped them that's given them the motivation and the inspiration to get where they are. Right. And exactly to this point, we did a panel for UK Games Expo where we were talking about Mars and what games get right and wrong about it. And we had Dr Cyan Proctor, and she talked about kind of, what helped, how inspiration works from her point of view.
That's one of the things that's really interesting when we're talking about Moon and Mars and settlements, and even the language we use, right? Colonization versus settlements, and what are the best of humanity that we want to bring forward. And if are we striving for that Star Trek kind of idea versus Star Wars? Do you want to trek across the solar system, or do you want to fight your way across the solar system? And so this whole idea of being inspired through games and through the science fiction that we read and all of the technology, because it's humans, our imagination is what fuels the future and inspires people like me and Jacob and you guys as to become scientists and to create games and to do these things. And so it's really important, because I remember as a kid, playing games with my family and thinking about, wow, what if this really existed? Or how do we make this a reality? And so when I think of people playing Transforming Mars, they are getting inspired, and the imagination, you don't know what kids are thinking. Wow, I really want to figure out how to do this piece of technology that Jacob has, put into the game. And that person may turn out and be able to do that in the future.
And this has also been true for myself. Like when I was doing research into Mars Horizon in the very early days, I posted on a space engineering forum, I think it was on Reddit, and I asked players like, who were playing the game, were any of you students, what were you studying? And did playing games like Space Engineers or Kerbal Space Program help you get there? And there was a few people replying going, yeah, actually, this is why I'm doing it. A couple of people, I think somebody messaged me and said, yeah, I actually changed the courses I was doing after playing Space Engineers. I thought this is what I want to be doing. And what's interesting, there is some research evidence that shows that your interest in these STEM subjects starts really early on, and that if earlier in your life you've got an interest in math, science, engineering, that follows you through, and that keeps that interest alive. So, and if science fiction and gaming is what helps you get that in the first place, then that's really key. And again, we from that same panel I mentioned before, we had Paul from the UK Space Agency, and he also talked to this idea of how the media we consume, games, books, films, etc., is really important in that inspiration.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, Cyan. Games and films and books are all there to help inspire the next generation of people who, these are the ones who will be living and working on Mars in the future, perhaps. The UK, we have about 46,000 people in the aerospace industry, and that's not enough for sending people to Mars and beyond. We always need more engineers, but also more scientists, more lawyers, administrators, artists, entertainers. We need all of these in order to make something like Settlement of Mars a reality, right? We always need more people.
I also think for me, like being into games and making things, I think it helped me not be afraid of maths and numbers. It helped me not see them as scary things that I had to solve, and tools that helped me achieve things that I wanted to do. So a good example for me is like I was massively into Dungeons and Dragons when I was younger. I played it loads. And of course, when you're doing D&D, you've got all the basic maths of just, addition and subtraction when you do damages and things like a thing called THACO, which is working out hit rolls and armor classes and all that kind of stuff. But it's also steeped in probability. So, if you've got a hit roll and you're figuring out what that hit roll is, say if you're playing the Call of Cthulhu game where they use the percentage system. So suddenly before long, using numbers and maths and concepts in maths like probability was really straightforward. So when in maths in classes we came to doing probability, I really enjoyed that, because I was like, oh yeah, this is all. This will help me be better at D&D and make better D&D adventures, because I can understand how I can represent and play with probability and get the outcomes that I think are more dramatic for the adventure that I'm either planning or playing in. And again, I think if you look at something like Kerbal Space Program, that maths-based knowledge is really directly in there. Like, you can't play it without seeing it. And I would say similarly in Mars Horizon, the numbers are there, like the details on payloads, even if they're just slightly one step removed. So, for example, when you're scheduling a mission, the windows in which the missions can happen, they're all based roughly on the orbital mechanics, because Mars relative to Earth, it's not always at the same distance. As the two planets move apart around the sun, you get periods when Mars is closer and periods when it's far apart. And again, it's these basic concepts that are really important that I think can inspire interest. And it's like, okay, well, why is Mars and Earth like that? And then suddenly you're going down this road of wanting to understand stuff to do with the mechanics of the solar system, and then that takes you into Newtonian physics. And then, of course, once you're in Newtonian physics, you start learning about quantum physics as the kind of the extension of how we understand physics. And before long, you're into the biggest things, the universe, and the smallest things, atoms, all of which are utterly fascinating.
Yeah, and I think also with Mars Horizon, what's really good about it is where it shows like all the different things that are involved in launching a rocket and in running these missions. It shows you that there's so many different roles that you could do, and I think that's quite inspiring for some people. Like, whatever they want to do, like, there's a role for you, and it shows you how important every single role is. So yeah, like, it depends. You don't have to be an astronaut. You could be any of these roles, and you'll still be a vital part in the space industry.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's one of the things that's exciting about it. We think of the astronauts as the kind of the top bit of it, but of course we talked about the importance of teamwork. And again, if you speak to people within it, they all acknowledge that they can't do their bit without maybe 100 other people doing all their other bits. And that's everywhere from the person who processes the payroll, because you need to get money to do the job, right through to the person who cleans the offices in which you're in, to the things you think of, the astronauts and the engineers building the things. But every single part of that needs to come together, work, and of course somebody's got to produce that, Mike,
right,
as you know very well.
But and this is the other thing that Mars Horizon shows, is that in that team, every single choice that you make is going to be having a positive or negative effect on the overall outcome. So even if having a certain building and having a certain astronaut doesn't seem like an extra amount, adding that extra 5% payload probability and that extra 2% of like launch reliability, you can really see how the whole chain of everyone working together is just pushing the probability of success of something up.
Yeah, and when we had a bunch of ESA staff play the game as well, and we got feedback afterwards, and a lot of them were really excited to see their roles represented in a game which you've not seen before. Because normally it is the astronaut, but they were like, it's my job to figure out the budgets, and I was there in the game, so I think that's really exciting. So that was nice, and they were inspired by that, and inspiring the next generation as well.
Yeah, it was great. It was a bit nerve-wracking when people from ESA were playing the game, because they're like, I remember when we were on a visit to the offices, and we did a demo for some of the European Space Agency people there, and then one of them played a game. He said, I think you've got that antenna in that satellite wrong. And I was going, oh, right. And he said, yeah, because I built that satellite. And you're like, okay, you probably know where that antenna should be. But it's great feedback to get, and they were really good about it. And ultimately that process of working with them, that teamwork collaborative process, has helped us get better, because their knowledge is now seeped into the game. And to me, again, it just underpins how like the science, technology, engineering stuff, like the knowledge of it, is making our game better. So even on the creative side, that is helping.
Yeah, definitely. Not only the knowledge, but also the anecdotes as well.
Yeah,
a lot of lot of funny stories.
Yes.
So we've looked at how games can teach you, how they can inspire you. You can learn a lot of teamwork for it, and I think with a lot of industries, but especially the space industry, these are all things that are really important for whatever area you want to work in, and it just shows you like there's a place for you there if you want to do it, and you should just go for it.
Absolutely. And I would say treat your gaming as part of what you're doing. If that's part of your identity and what you're about, then help it power all those other things. Because if it's a school or college or university work, that still needs to be done. Gamify that, turn that into a thing that helps you move forward with it. And I think what's really exciting, that maybe somebody watching this video now, looking at their career and where it might go, maybe in a decade or two's time, somebody watching this might be boarding a ship, being part of the first crewed mission to Mars. And that's super exciting to think of.
It'd be amazing. Thanks much for watching our talk.
Yeah, thank you.
Cheers.
Absolutely.
Bye.